Spacing of four holes. Which of the following most true strongly supports the hypothesis? Okay, there must be some hypothesis by some. I can see something over here. Some musicologist. All right, so the spacing of four holes on a fragment of a blown flute excavated by this at a campsite is just what is required to play the third through sixth notes of a diatonic scale. Okay, so the spacing is done for a purpose, according to historians today, I guess. The seven note in much of this. Okay. So historians today are saying that this spacing of a bone that they found at a campsite was done purposely. It wasn't just a random spacing, it was done with the when Neanderthals were playing music or doing something. They Neanderthals knew that they had to place um, this the holes separately. It, that's what historians today believe, that Neanderthals were aware of how music is created. Most likely, that's why the spacing is done in the hope. That's how spacing is done, and that concept is used even in today's music. I think that's what this is saying. Okay, so that's good. I guess that's a big revelation. Is that the hypothesis? Let's see. Music guys, I guess music historians, I guess, therefore hypothesize that the let me just say, therefore hypothesize that the music scale was developed and used thousands of years before it was a hype. Aha. So it's a bit. I'm sure there's a gap in this. The spacing is just what is required. So it's too coincidental. It's because it's too coincidental that the spacing is exactly the way it is. Historians probably believe that Neanderthals did it on purpose. So the premise spacing is 100% is too coincidental. Just what is required, as they say, to play some diatonic scales. Conclusion: Neanderthals knew, developed music, the I don't know what it's called, diatonic scale, long before before the diatonic scale became mainstream. Okay, so that's the conclusion. I guess we have to assume it's true because it's a strength in a question. So they developed this diatonic long before. So, that's the conclusion. All right, so which most strongly supports? Bone flutes were probably the only instruments used by Neanderthals. Yeah, I think this does support, because if these were the only ones used and they have these four holes spaced the way it is, then that would support that they were the bone flute. Is this a bone flute? I guess we're talking about. I guess this bone flute is probably, if this is the only instrument made by Neanderthals for the purposes of music, then this further supports this. It strengthens the argument that, this strengthens the conclusion that Neanderthals developed the scale, and I think A. The answer is A. I would select A, but let's just continue. No music that is known to have used is of an earlier date than the flute. This doesn't strengthen. This is almost like an assumption. This is if this was an assumption question, I would select that. That is known to have a diatonic scale is of an earlier date than the flute found. I think this is, and even if it was true that there was an instrument that is known to have no musical instrument that is known to have used a diatonic is of an earlier date than the flute. I don't think even if this was true, I mean, sorry, it is true. Even if the flute that they found was the earliest instrument, I don't think that really is. I don't think this assists or denies. I don't think this strengthens or weakens because it even let's say it's going by if B is true. B is true that there is no other instrument that is assuming that this is true. I don't know how it helps because I'm trying to develop the conclusion that the diatonic scale was developed and used thousands of years before it was. If there was an instrument that was that is supposed to be earlier, I I'm not sure. I can't explain it, but I don't think B is right. It just doesn't really help. The flute was made from a bone, cave bear bone, and the campsite which the flute fragment was excavated was in a cave that is also contains skeletal remains of cave bears. Okay, so what if it's been made from a bear bone? So what? Flutes are the simplest that can be constructed by allowing by the simplest wind instrument. So what if it's the simplest? If it's the simplest or the toughest? The cave bear leg bone used to make it would have been would have been long enough to make a flute capable of being. So the leg bone would have been long enough to make a flute capable of playing with them. The bone used to make the flute would have been long enough. Would have. I think that isn't would have been long enough. The bone would have been long enough to make a. I don't know the what does the word would mean in this case. It would have been long enough, or was it long enough? I think the word would is had this word been should have been is long enough to make a flute capable. Had this been the cave bear leg bone used to make the flute is long enough to make a flute capable, then I think that was strengthened. Would have been. I think this is hypothetical, even though this is saying if true. X was flutes are probably the only instruments. I think it's A.